The Global X-Air Boeing 767 soared into the sky, carrying 158 souls destined for deportation. They were Brazilian immigrants, ripped from their lives in the United States and sent back to a country some barely remembered. But this was no ordinary flight. This was a journey into a nightmare. Mechanical failures plagued the plane even before it left Louisiana. A sense of foreboding gripped the passengers. Little did they know the horrors that awaited them. The engine sputtered and coughed. The ventilation system failed, turning the cabin into a sweltering inferno. Fear etched itself onto the faces of the deportees, many of whom were families with young children, elderly individuals clinging to their loved ones, and young men and women with shattered dreams. Panic began to set in as the reality of their situation sunk in. They were trapped. The air inside the plane grew thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket of heat and despair. Sweat dripped from brows and soaked through thin clothing. The cries of babies pierced the stifling air, a symphony of distress. The elderly, their faces pale and drawn, gasped for breath. Hours stretched into an eternity. Food and water, basic human necessities, were denied. Toilets overflowed, the stench adding another layer of misery to their ordeal. The metal shackles biting into their wrists and ankles served as a constant reminder of their dehumanized state. Each jolt of turbulence, every groan of the struggling engine amplified their fear. "It was torture," whispered Maria, a young mother whose eyes reflected the terror she had endured. "They treated us like animals, worse than animals." Her voice, hoarse from dehydration and screaming, shook with suppressed rage and trauma. "I saw an old man collapse, his chest heaving," recounted a young man, his voice barely above a whisper. He was begging for water, but the guards just laughed. His eyes, vacant and haunted, spoke volumes of the horrors he had witnessed. These were not isolated incidents. These were the collective cries of 158 human beings, their voices united in a chorus of suffering. Their stories, dripping with pain and indignation, painted a grim picture of the inhumane conditions they were subjected to. After a grueling, seemingly endless journey, the plane finally landed in Manaus, Brazil, for an emergency stop. Exhausted, dehydrated, and desperate for relief, the passengers braced themselves for what they hoped would be a moment of respite. But their ordeal was far from over. To their utter shock and disbelief, the shackles remained. They were forced to endure the sweltering heat of the tarmac, trapped inside the metal coffin that had become their prison. This blatant disregard for their dignity, this cruel extension of their suffering, was a violation of international norms and Brazilian law. The image of shackled men, women, and even children disembarking on Brazilian soil sent shockwaves across the country and beyond. It became a potent symbol of the dehumanizing treatment inflicted upon deportees, a stark reminder of the human cost of draconian immigration policies. Section 5. The Shadow of Deportation. This harrowing incident was not an isolated one. It unfolded against a backdrop of escalating deportations and increasingly hostile rhetoric towards immigrants. The Trump administration, in its relentless pursuit of a hardline immigration agenda, had ramped up deportations, creating a climate of fear and uncertainty for immigrant communities. Trump's incendiary language, labeling entire populations as criminals and threats, dehumanized individuals and fueled xenophobia. His administration's policies, often implemented with a callous disregard for human rights, had real-world consequences. Families were torn apart, dreams were shattered, and lives were irrevocably damaged. The deportation flight from Louisiana to Brazil was a stark illustration of this harsh reality, a microcosm of the human suffering inflicted in the name of border security. The incident ignited outrage and condemnation, forcing the world to confront the human cost of these policies. Section 6. International Outcry and Acquiescence. The incident sparked international outrage, with governments and human rights organizations condemning the inhumane treatment of the Brazilian deportees. Brazil, though initially hesitant to confront the United States directly, lodged a formal protest, expressing deep concern over the incident. Colombia, initially defiant in the face of U.S. pressure, had reluctantly resumed accepting deportation flights after threats of economic sanctions. Honduras, despite its president's call for regional unity against the deportations, remained largely silent. This mix of muted criticism and reluctant acquiescence highlighted the complex dynamics between the United States and Latin America. The economic and political clout of the United States often overshadowed concerns over human rights, leaving many countries hesitant to challenge its actions openly. Section 7. Broken Promises of Humanity. Ironically, the inhumane treatment of the Brazilian deportees on the Global X flight directly contradicted a 2017 treaty between the United States and Brazil. This agreement stipulated that the treatment of deportees must be dignified, respectful, and humane. The reality on the ground, however, told a different story. The treaty, rendered meaningless by the actions of the U.S. government, underscored the vast disconnect between rhetoric and reality. It exposed the hollowness of assurances and the fragility of agreements when faced with political expediency and xenophobic fervor. The incident served as a stark reminder that even in the face of international agreements and legal frameworks, the protection of human rights remained a constant struggle, a battle against apathy, prejudice, and the abuse of power. Section 8. A World Divided. The harrowing journey of the 158 Brazilian deportees exposed a world increasingly divided along the lines of nationality, ethnicity, and legal status. It highlighted the plight of millions of migrants seeking a better life, only to be met with suspicion, hostility, and often outright cruelty. The incident also underlined the interconnectedness of our world, where decisions made in Washington, D.C. reverberate across continents, impacting the lives of individuals thousands of miles away. It forced a long, hard look at the global repercussions of national policies, particularly those rooted in fear and exclusion. The incident served as a wake-up call, a stark reminder of our shared humanity and the urgent need for empathy and compassion in a world grappling with the complexities of migration and the challenges of building inclusive societies. Section 9. A Plea for Dignity. The cries of the 158 Brazilian deportees, echoing across continents, serve as a powerful reminder of the human cost of draconian immigration policies. Their ordeal, a testament to the enduring resilience of the human spirit, compels us to confront the consequences of our collective inaction. It is time for a fundamental shift in our approach to immigration, one grounded in empathy, respect for human dignity, and a recognition of our shared humanity. We must demand accountability from our leaders, urging them to enact policies that reflect our values and uphold the rights of all individuals, regardless of their immigration status. Let the suffering endured on that flight from Louisiana to Brazil serve as a catalyst for change, a call to action to build a world where every human being is treated with dignity and respect. We must never forget their stories, for in their voices we hear the cries of humanity demanding justice and compassion.